Today is another very special interview because we have an old friend of mine and collaborator, Concezio. I only know him by his nickname Connor. I always call him that way, but his full name. Well, let me quickly look at that up again. It's Concezio Cercone. Yes, sorry Connor for not remembering your name that easily. I never call you by that name, so. But yes, he's here with us today, and we're going to talk about a bunch of professional workflow stuff because he has a lot of experience in big commercial productions and also collaborating with Clinton Jones and Corridor Digital a lot in the past. So yeah, we're going to get into all of that, and let me just switch to the interview setup so he can introduce himself. There we go. What's up, Concezio?
Hi, I'm doing good. I'm Concezio. Real name is Connor, but whole family and everything they call me Concezio. So all good.
Oh wait,
I work in
so your real name is Connor, but like your
yeah.
family calls you Concezio?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
It's
okay.
my grandfather's name, so they
Hmm.
didn't want me to have too much of an Italian name on paper, but they go by that.
I see, I see. And how is your like own relationship to those like two versions of the name? Like what do you prefer?
Usually out in LA and stuff, I'll just do Concezio. If people call me Connor, I don't mind. It's whatever. It
I
doesn't matter
see.
to me.
I see, I see. Okay. Yeah, please continue. Let's introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I've been working in the industry for about 7 years. I started 3D back in 2011 and kind of learned off of uh, just reading documentation for Cinema 4D at the time, and I happened to get into Gnomon School of Visual Effects back in 2014. Started on that, did that for a few years, and then I went over to Corridor for a short stint, and then found uh, great connections through there, and I worked freelance with through that kind of connection until I'd say 2020, maybe 2021. I worked at Braun Studios up in Vancouver for a while, and
Hmm.
then from Braun Studios I did a little bit of work for Apple, and then from there I kind of bounced around doing more product visualization, lighting work for products and everything.
I see, I see. You said you would describe yourself as a technical artist, right? So you know a lot about the workflows and the technicalities about 3D software, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say to classify myself, I'm much less of a creative person and much more of a technical aspect in 3D. If you give me an image, I can recreate that. But if you ask me to create a great image, I'm not going to have too much of a good foothold to make something like that.
I see, I see. I mean, I collaborated you with together with you on the in the past already, like especially on our music video here, the MLBB music video this year,
Hmm.
and it was. I mean, I still think you have a artistic vein in you because, like I told you, only like kind of like the shots that I wanted, and you made them look really nice and like added confetti on your own, right? Like so,
Hmm.
I think you
For sure. Yeah, I
still
mean,
have that.
still there, but I'd say that the disparity is very high.
I
Uh,
see, I see, I
in
see.
where I think my skills are, at least where I think they are.
And
They
what
could
do you
be different.
think? What do you think where that comes from? Like, why are you so much more interested in the technicalities and the rendering process and the workflows?
Uh, I think it comes from frustration of having things go wrong and having
Hmm.
things uh, take more time than they need to. I'm lazy, so I like things to take as minimal time as they can. So if I can save 20 seconds here, 5 minutes here, 15 minutes here on just making, something more efficient, then at the end of the day, I've either finished the project faster or I'm able to, have a little bit more free time for myself.
I see, I see. Yeah, okay, that's it's a big motivation for sure. Yeah, for me it's also like with pipeline management, right? Like I love using kind of like task management tools like ClickUp, where you can
Hmm.
just like optimize everything and like make sure that people get the information and like things interconnect. Yeah, that kind of stuff is really fun for me. Do you? tap into that direction at all too, with like kind of like task management?
Not task management directly, but I do have tools that either are deployed or I'm working on that kind of manage what tasks people are working on, but not directly telling somebody that when this task is done, this one needs to be picked up by these people. Not really managing part of it, but delivery of assets for their tasks. Yeah.
I see, I see. What is I've heard of like tools in that direction. Like one thing that comes to my mind is called Shotgun, right? I think it's for
Mhm.
delivering shots and like 3D animation and stuff like that. Is there anything that you could recommend from that direction that people could try out to like
I
improve
would
their?
say ShotGrid is the most widespread. If you're going to learn how to work with one, ShotGrid's probably the most
Mm,
diverse. Most studios are going to be on that one. There's also NIM, which is I think it's the Tropic. It was their project management software, and then there's one more that I'm forgetting, but it's the direct competitor to uh, Autodesk for ShotGrid.
okay. So ShotGrid is by Autodesk.
Yes.
Okay, okay, I see. Um, I would like to figure out or like hear of your favorite project, like your favorite creative project or experience that you had in the past.
I think I think the time that I had at Corridor was the most fun.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it is what it seems like at their studio. It's very much a bunch of people who, like, at the time at least, don't quite know how to get to the end product, but they're not going to let that stop them. It's just, brainstorming and how can we make this work? And there's a lot of jank, but that's kind of like part of the fun at that studio. And it's as much as it's not super, it wasn't super organized at the time. I think like uh, Ren was in Max, Clint was in Cinema 4D, Peter was in Blender, I was in Maya. Like everybody was just in like a different DCC, and we're trying to like toss files back and forth. I think it was just it felt like a bunch of people who were friends in a room hanging out, making a cool video, and that was fun.
Mm-mm. Yeah, yeah, it seems like when you don't have when you don't pressure yourself so much to like make stuff professional, right? To just like have fun with your friends making stuff that you want to see, right? I think it's much
Yeah.
easier to yeah, be creative and like have fun doing this stuff. And also I guess learning, right? Like learning new things is
hmm
way easier in that kind of environment.
Yeah, nobody was doing daily reviews worrying about like a 4 pixel like cluster, and it was just like, oh, that looks sick. Like, let's roll with it.
Yeah, yeah. The what did you call it? Like pixel fucking or like
Yeah, it's
or,
pixel fucking. It's on some of the product visualization stuff, they'll sit there and ask like, hey, these like this grouping of like 10 pixels on a 32 by 32,000 image. This grouping of a couple pixels is like 25% too luminant and it's 2% shifted on the color wheel. Can we get that fixed up? And you're like, oh man, whatever you
real
want. I mean, they're paying, so, but
real perfection, yeah. But you
yeah.
still like is there also a side of you that like what is enjoyable about this kind of work that you're doing with the product visualization?
Uh, I think each device has its own challenge. They all have their own material, and I think the key is you're trying to make it look simple, but
Hmm.
there's tons and tons and tons of lights in it. Like if you look at any big visualization for like a big product, you're gonna think, oh, maybe it's just like some little HDRI, maybe like 4 or 5 lights. It's like 50, 60 lights, just like one light for a little highlight, and then you got blockers in there to shape it, and then the highlights never want to do what you need them to do, so you have to kind of force them to do what you need them to do and kind of massage them into place, and then you're going in the nuke and kind of editing them and looping out errors, and then Photoshop takes it. It's a huge process, but I think it's just that it's a challenge to get it to look that the way that you need it to,
Mhm.
and you're just highlighting features and stuff in interesting ways, and yeah, it's difficult off the bat.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, yeah, when you really have to worry about every single pixel looking perfect, it sounds almost like painting, right? Where you really have to go in there and you like every stroke you do,
Hmm.
yeah, you are able to see it, right? So you like look at every single part and like try to do you look at like when you look at a product visualization, do you look at every single part and like work on them individually, or do you still keep the whole product in view to make sure it all
So
works together?
I'm since I'm mostly working on stills, I do have I came up with a way to do it for to make it a little bit easier on myself.
Mm.
So I take the entire device, and let's say there's a button on one of the sides. I put all of the sections into their own container, and every section that isn't this button, I remove its alpha from the image. So the only thing left is the exact pixels from this button that's going to be visible. And I
Uh-huh.
just worry about that button on a layer. So if there's like cameras and there's buttons and there's like the side of a device, all of those are separate render layers for me. I don't need to light link anything, which is amazing. Uh,
Ah, okay, okay, I
and
see.
I can kind of focus on it. And one issue that you can have with lighting an entire device in one scene at that level is when you light link, it's telling this light doesn't affect this object, right?
Hmm.
Um, but it doesn't say anything about the bounce light from that
Hmm.
light. So if this light goes down and hits an object and bounces, that bounce light is still going to affect the object that you told the original light to not affect.
Hmm.
So you may need to break it out into these extra render layers and just keep things isolated. They're so hyper uh like focused on what the detail is that it's almost easier to break them out because let's say that original light is affecting, both object A and B. Now, the art director comes back and he says, "I just want object B to change." But to change B, you have to change the light. When you change the light, it affects A. Now you're in a whole mess and you're so I just break it out
Yeah.
from the beginning to make it easier on myself down the line. It's a little bit more set up at the beginning, but I think with reviews and iterations, it really fixes that problem that you run into.
I see. Yeah, yeah, I definitely see what you're saying, because yeah, then otherwise you would keep bouncing back to other problems of the image. Like fixing one
Hmm.
thing creates another problem, right? And the way you do it, you really can just fix a specific problem very individually. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't run into affecting one light and then you go to a different render layer that has the same light. Now it's in a different location and it becomes a whole mess. And just with a little bit of that extra setup, it becomes really like breezy. It becomes like really easy to just kind of like kick through it. And I'd say the only downside is you don't get to see the whole thing at one time. So if you have a harder time visualizing, what one object is going to look like in relation to another, you might need to render things out and then put them on like an image plane behind the object so you can kind of,
Ah,
see how
okay.
things are affecting each other.
Yeah. So that's just yeah, like your specific workflow that works for you then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm, do you have any like goals for this next year? Like, do you want to work in a new field or like experience new tools? Like, what's your idea for the future?
I think um, so. My whole thing with 3D is I like the whole process. I just like doing 3D in general. So whoever wants to pay me to do that, I'm there. So I don't really mind what the project is. I'm gonna make it my own and I'm gonna have fun with it. But with that, I've been doing products for a few years. If somebody came and offered me something similar to what I'm making now, I would definitely consider it. It would definitely be fun to have more variety on my portfolio and artistic skill. Um,
Oh, talking
I
about your
think.
portfolio, if anyone wants to check it out, It's down there in the corner, the QR code guest link. If you want to check out Concezio's portfolio, yeah, just scan that in.
Hmm.
All right, please continue.
I think at the place I'm currently working at, it would be really cool to move a little bit more into a uh, managing position that still does art, but is more in the technical managing aspect, like just doing pipeline and processes, stuff like that. Like I do a lot of documentation, I do a lot of tutorials internally.
Mm.
Uh, I just try to share the things that I've done for myself to make my workflow better with everybody that I work with to make them work better. So a little
Yeah,
bit more technically managing would be definitely something I would be interested in.
that's really interesting that you're so focused and interested in optimization. Like I guess maybe coming back to Corridor a little bit, since you said they were mostly unorganized. Like, well, how did that work or feel for you?
Uh, that was my first gig out of school, so it was definitely interesting. The school I went to is very much a like production pipeline school. Teaches you how to be a production artist, and then I show up at Corridor and I was trying to go through like all the steps I was just taught in school to make things like perfect and no errors and all this stuff. And they're like, "What are you doing? Like, we don't need it to be that perfect. Just get it out. Like, it's not that serious." And I was like, "Oh, it's like I kind of got out of school and then stumbled over this roadblock that was the jank.
The jank, the embracement of the jank.
Yeah, and I think that definitely taught me a bunch of it doesn't have to be perfect because the past few years before that it was everything has to be perfect and here's how to do it and all these steps and um, quarter is very much like well if 100% takes a week but 90% takes one day we're going to take that 90% because it's almost as good and it's way less time.
Yeah. Did that whole process teach you something that you didn't learn in school? Maybe.
Uh, how to work with a bunch of different DCCs like Max and Cinema 4D and Blender and pass files back and forth was an interesting thing to figure out. Just because in school we were only doing like Maya Houdini, so getting out and then having to learn the quirks of how Max likes to receive files and how Cinema likes to receive files and how to receive a Blender file and open it and export what you need and all that. That was definitely an interesting thing I didn't learn in school.
I see. I see. I also remember you wrote almost an article like in the Discord server
Yeah.
when we were discussing about different 3D software. You yeah, you wrote a very in-depth kind of like explanation of like different softwares and their strengths. I would like to maybe get a little bit of that from you right now too. Like, what do you think? What softwares are like good to use, or if you want to go into the professional field, what should you focus on? Or if you want to be more indie, what should you focus on? Like, what's your opinions on those tools?
So there's definitely yeah, there's two worlds. There's the studio pipeline and that's one whole set of stuff. But if you're really just trying to like make fun stuff, there's no issue with using whatever software you want, right? Like if you want to use Blender, you want to use Cinema, Max, Moto, whatever it is. When you start to get into I want to make this 3D specifically, not just using 3D software, but I want to be like a 3D artist in a studio. There are specific products you need to use to maximize your chances of getting a job. You can be, a really really skilled artist in one program, but if a studio doesn't have that in their pipeline, they probably don't want to take the time, the months or a year or whatever it is to get you up to speed in the production pipeline software. So
Can you recommend any like specific softwares, like so we kind of like know what we're talking about? Like, what would be
yeah,
the go-to package?
so if for like animation, rigging, scene assembly, and a lot of modeling, it is still Maya. And then for things like effects and, sometimes it's scene assembly and Houdini's really picking up. So if you want to learn Houdini, that's also a really great option. You can get Houdini, I think it's for $16 a month equivalent, and then Maya's like $25 a month or something. They're not too expensive, but they're great for learning and getting into the industry. Then you get into UVs, and UVs is always a fun one. There's one program called Hedis, and it is one of the weirdest programs to work in. It looks like it's from Windows 95. UI has never been updated. It's a crazy looking program, but the UVs it creates is amazing. I will never subject somebody to learning Hedis because Rhizome exists, and Rhizome is almost as good, and its interface is a lot easier to use. If you want to have the absolute best UVs, you can go with Hedis, but if you're okay with that 98, 99%, you can just go with Rhizome. It's all good. Then
That's
trees
interesting.
yeah, I mean it's super
Never heard
fun.
of that. How does UV
The
layout?
smaller studio or team you're working with, you're probably going to be more and more in one program. And then there's a lot of people who just do everything in Blender for themselves or for like these like small commercial, small production stuff. But when you start getting into the higher level, it's kind of the difference between like making your own race car and then having an F1 car. That little extra, couple horsepower and that little extra, aerodynamic on the downforce costs a lot more money. It's a lot more difficult to maintain, but it's just that extra little bit on top to make it, the best you can. So when you get into those production pipelines, almost everything has its own specific program that you're using to complete the task. Like you're doing cloth in Marvelous, you're doing hair in something like Ornatrix or Shaven Haircut, but I think Shaven Haircut's dead. They moved it into Unreal Hair now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then there's XGen and like then again the trees and Speed Tree, and then effects is in Houdini, and then you go over to sculpting, and that's in ZBrush, and then motion captures and Filmbox, which is FBX, the file output.
Where Filmbox is its own program?
Yeah, so I learned that when I started working at Braun. FBX is the scene file for Filmbox, and Filmbox is Motion Builder by Autodesk.
Motion
So
builder. Oh, okay.
when you there's no like .blend file or .maya file. There's just a .fbx, and that is the actual scene file. Has all the settings. It opens up correctly. I thought it was weird, but I was like, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's basically like the software created its like safe format, and then everybody was like, "Oh yeah, this format is actually
That's a
pretty
cool
good.
format."
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna use it.
So yeah, Filmbox is really interesting, and then you get into previs stuff or ArcViz, and those are their whole like own section. ArcViz is kind of, I would say, the most scattered as a professional industry. They kind of use everything. Like you go to a studio and you're not really guaranteed that they're going to use a set of software. Every little studio has their own, like, oh yeah, we use Cinema, and then this one's like, oh, we use Unreal, and then this one's like, oh, we use Blender, and then they all use kind of like their own thing, and it's always interesting to hear people come from that world. I know another interesting program used in the industry is in the shoe industry. Modo is the program that they use. I was like,
Modo is king for shoes.
Modo is king for shoes. If you go on their website, they have like a bunch of images of like sneakers and stuff for Modo, and because that industry kind of stuck in Modo created tools to make creating shoes easier. So now it's like kind of spiraled into cementing itself in that program, which is cool.
That's fun. I mean, if you have that's always like also like a marketing trick, right? If you find your niche, just like focus down on it, right?
Yeah. And then Previs doing a lot in Unreal just because they're not worried about it being uh, super accurate or whatever. They kind of set up their scenes and then they just need like renders with some lighting out as fast as possible to send to the client.
Yeah, I guess that kind of like maybe brings us good into the next topic, which is the current state of the creative industry.
Hmm.
What is your take on the current state? Like, what do you see? Yeah, where it develops, right? Like, what's good, what's bad about our creative industry right now?
It's in a tough spot because I mean the economy isn't doing too cash money, so investors aren't like jonesing to shovel money into entertainment. And then there was also kind of a looming, not threat, but like thought that the Animation Guild and the Art Directors Guild were going to do strikes. So a lot of studios kind of pulled back and refused to start new projects because if they're going to have a strike, we don't want to be mid production. So
Mm.
I think that didn't happen. So things might be starting to kick back up. But there was a the streaming wars kind of ended. Uh,
Oh yeah.
so yeah, I mean there was so much production going on because all of these different companies wanted to have a slice of the pie, and once they figured out that they I think they figured out that the pie can't be shared amongst 14 different companies.
Mm.
So they've kind of also pulled back. Like you'll see like Netflix and Amazon, their productions have kind of slowed down a bunch because they're like, oh well, you know, Netflix used to have everything. Now it has almost nothing comparatively to what it used to have. It's charging like 4 times as much as it used to, and at this point, people are paying as much as they used to for cable. So it's just the streaming wars seem like they're winding down or have ended, and companies have kind of noticed and they're pulling back. So the industry kind of did a big like hill during like between COVID and now, and now it's kind of like crashing down. It will even out, but it's definitely not super blooming at the moment. It's kind of it's a little stinky. It's a little poopy.
Uh-oh, stinky. Do you think that's gonna kind of like rise up again? Like what is your prediction for the
Yeah,
future?
I think it always has kind of like an up and a down. I know back in I think it was the mid 2010s there was a whole kind of downfall, at least in the US, on production because they were doing a lot of outsourcing to because it was just super cheap. And then they realized that everything was coming back and they had to fix it. So they were spending more money than they would have just having it in the States. So there was a whole
Mm.
like mid 2010s, people are like losing their job, and then everybody got their job back. And then they kind of learned how to work with outsourcing studios in the past couple of years on how they need to direct people, and the talent's gotten better and it's gotten a lot better. But I think definitely it will bounce back. I don't think it will be as crazy as it was during the streaming wars, where just anybody, like almost everybody who was applying, was like, yeah, you can work on this. uh,
With some
I
more
think
hands.
yeah, I think when it does bounce back, the skill floor is going to be higher for juniors, which will push mid level and senior to higher skills to have those positions.
I see, I see. So it's more, I guess in a way it's getting more elite then?
Yeah, I mean it always is, right? Like you think about the quality that they were able to produce even, you know, 10 years ago, and even people now would be like, "Oh, I can make something better," right? Uh World records are always getting broken, everybody's always improving, so over time, this you can't be a junior right now and never get better and expect to either stay a junior or get promoted. You gotta always be working in this industry, especially how fast it moves.
Yeah, it's definitely very important to keep up to date and like learn the new
Hmm.
things that are happening. Um,
what was the last piece of software you learned? Like the
uh,
new piece of software.
I mean, the cool thing is I learn a new software every week, right? Like for the new tool
Ooh,
Tuesday, I always learn something new. And yeah, I guess Liquigen. We did
Liquid
Liquigen
Gem.
this
How is
week.
that?
I mean, the speed is amazing, right? Like it's really fun to just like
Mhm.
quickly simulate stuff, and it looks like pretty good. Honestly, I don't think it's good enough for commercial work. In the most cases, probably. But what I've found, yeah, I didn't like so much about it. I just didn't see much customizability in the liquid simulation itself. It felt like
Mhm.
it was really focused on making water, right? Like making water as fast and as realistic as possible. But
Yeah.
even it doesn't look. I mean, yeah, as I said, like the visual quality is not enough for commercial work, in my opinion. It's super fast, but yeah, you can't change the liquid too much, right? The simulation type, which is weird, I think.
You can't do like a maple syrup or like oil, that kind of thing, or what do you mean?
Not really. I mean, as far as I could saw, it's not really possible. Like I looked through all the presets, and I also played around with all the values, and you have much less values than in Embergen, for example, right? With Embergen feels much more open-ended with things you can do. Like you can, like people figured out how to use Embergen to make sand simulations and lightning strikes and stuff, right? Like you are really like because it's a node system, you can do a lot of things, but in Liquidgen, it feels like the whole simulation, the style of the liquid, is all in one node, anyways, in the simulation node, and you're not able to like to plug much things in there that would actually change the
Is
liquid.
is it still in beta, or what do you think that is? I mean, if it is released, it's like version one or like point 0.9
Uh,
or something, right?
it must be some kind of open beta or open alpha right now. Yeah, it's definitely not a full release. But yeah, I was just a bit disappointed that it felt so limiting.
Sure, they'll update it. I mean, as well as Embergen does. I mean, Embergen's kind of the same thing where I would say for production stuff, Embergen is like oh no, our Houdini sim isn't going to finish in time for this commercial or TV show. I
Uh-huh.
guess we'll like kick out an Embergen thing to cover our ass. Uh, I'm sure it will get better. You know, that team definitely works pretty hard on what they do. So I'm sure I'm sure they know that just haven't had the time to implement.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I mean, like even looking at their website and everything, like everything really is just straight up water, right? Like
Yeah,
it's all focused on water. There's not really much variation there.
yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, hopefully they'll expand the possibilities a bit because yeah,
I'm
the
sure they
speed
will.
is great. Yeah, if we get like all kinds of water simulations or liquid simulations with
Yeah.
that kind of speed, it's gonna be really useful.
Embergen was kind of the same when it came out, so I'm sure it's the same thing. They kind of released the initial product to get like big bug fixes and stuff out of the way while they're in the background trying to figure out how to implement like all the viscosities and foaming and bubbles and like all that crazy stuff for simulations.
Yeah, I hope they'll figure that. This is. Mm, do you see any like maybe talking about new tools or other things? Like, do you see any big opportunities coming up in the creative field that like that it's worth to like jump on and learn?
There's always a need for people who are really good at rigging and 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 writing Python.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, that and simulation artists are usually in high demand for Houdini, uh, that kind of stuff. There's usually like always you can if you're good at rigging and you're good at coding and or you can do pretty good simulations, you're probably gonna find a job pretty quickly.
I see. Okay, that's interesting. So simulation, Python programming, and rigging, those are like the three areas in the 3D animation world that you see
Yeah.
needing like having big opportunities right now.
it's the most technical, and I feel like a lot of people who get into the industry are more creative on that side. So
Hmm.
trying to get creative people to be super technical and not be sculpting some fun thing or texturing some fun thing. They're just sitting there connecting bones and worrying about how the deformation of a wrist works. And
Hmm.
it's much more difficult to get somebody to be excited about that. And I think that's why it's much more in demand because there's not many in the industry. For coding, if you're in a coding industry, it's you're having more fun, but you could be making way more money working like in big tech, you know.
Hmm. I see.
So it's
Yeah,
hard
yeah.
to get those. It's hard to get really good coders to come work for the industry because they would make less money.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah, yeah. I could see that making. Yeah, yeah. Is it maybe is it like an interesting or maybe a way to get into the industry to just like kind of like push yourself to learn to code and just to get in the industry and then kind of like make the connections and kind of like as a I mean I guess like a little bit like the rotoscope artists, right? Like back then, like
Hmm.
when big studios needed a lot of rotoscope artists, so they would employ like that would be where you start off as a VFX or 3D artist, right? You would do rotoscoping in big studios, and then you just like yeah develop your skills, you develop your connections, and you rise up in the roles and like actually end up creating more creative stuff. So is that maybe like Python coding? Is that the new rotoscoping maybe?
I think Python is a supplementary thing. So like you would go into a studio and be like, I do prop modeling, but I also can code, or I do animation, but I can also code. It's kind of like a side thing that you would have because it would be hard to get a. There's not really a junior tool coder job. There's like a
Oh,
like senior tool coders and mid level tool coders. So you would kind of enter piggybacking with something else, but having the code makes you more desirable, right? Like
hmm.
if I were to hire somebody who equal skill in animation, but one of them can make their own tools and like work with the coding team, they're more desirable than somebody who just animates, right?
I see. Okay, so
But
that's a very good tip, I think. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but you have to keep in mind learning how to code takes away the time from learning how to animate or learning your other skill. So you kind of have to balance it a little bit, right?
Hmm.
I always talk about every year you only get so many skill points, like it's a MMO or an RPG,
Yeah,
and if you put all your skill points into one skill for 3D, you're going to get better way faster. And once you get a job in a studio, you're going to have access to everybody else who put all their skill points into one thing. So you're going to be able to ask questions to all these really talented people and get better faster. So I always tell people to like hyper focus on like one or two things, get a job, and then you can kind of fan out as far as you want because like I'm good enough to have a job at a studio with a skill. So now I can kind of branch out and do everything else that I want to do.
I think that's an interesting tip. Yeah, yeah. I haven't heard it in that way before, so that's cool. That's a good idea.
Hmm.
We actually have our first question here in the chat by Keanu. Let's kind of maybe address that. He says, "Hey guys, any advice for someone just starting out 3D and product animation and trying to make a living out of it?" Yeah, I guess like we kind of talked about like different answers to that question already in the like through this interview, but maybe Connor, you have something specific for Keanu right now?
Uh, I would say if you want to learn how to make good ads, I always suggest copying ads. You can see on my ArtStation, I took an image they made of an iPhone, and I tried my best at the time. I can do much better now, but I tried my best at the time to copy that ad one to one. Like I tried to get the camera angle correct. I tried to get the materials correct. I tried to get all the highlights correct. And that taught me a lot about how things are lit and how things are created. So if you take, you know, an ad for whatever, and your goal is to one copy it, you're gonna have a much easier time figuring out where your weaknesses are, because if your ad doesn't look like theirs, then either your eye needs trained, your artistic eye needs trained, your technical skills need trained, or just something else in the mix. But by the end of trying to copy an ad, you should be able to show it to somebody and they go, "Why are you showing me the same ad two times?" That kind of thing. You know what I mean?
That's the goal, yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I just saw
But
this. Why are you showing me again?
yeah, if you want like, uh, if you're trying to go to a studio, you're probably going to want to learn Maya and Houdini. If you're doing it on your own, and you're just always going to work for yourself, you use whatever you want.
Is there a place in product animation for more like independent artists, or is product animation mostly, like big studio corporate style, so more like traditional software?
I mean, big clients aren't usually going to hire like an individual. They're going to hire like a firm, like like a product animation firm kind of thing. Uh, but I mean, you can still work for yourself and make a lot of money. There is definitely room for it. Uh, but it's usually easier to be at a studio with like a steady income than to be in freelance where you're always trying to find the next gig and always marketing yourself, and it's a lot more work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I hope that answered your question, Keanu. While we're on that topic, like, if anybody has questions, just write them in the chat or join the live stream Discord channel and just talk to us. We are here to talk to you guys. There's also something that we talked about in the, how was it called? Like the rooms before a concert, like before like people go on onto the
The
stage.
green room.
The green room, yes, yes. Okay, so we talked in the green room about your process of, because you are involved with Clint, with the Punishers challenges a lot, like as a moderator and admin, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, we talked a little bit, or you start to explain to me how the process is of actually picking out the top 100 from those like 3 to 5 hour long submissions, right? Like how do you
Yeah.
guys go about that?
It it's definitely a big process. Getting all of the files downloaded is usually a few hours because it's, each submission can be up to 100 megabytes. So when you have 5 to 6,500, you're downloading terabytes of data, and then or maybe not terabytes, but you're downloading like a lot of data. Not everybody's doing 100 megabytes for their submission. Then like Clint will throw it into DaVinci, and he'll like tell everybody, hey, get in here. We're gonna go through all the submissions, and kind of all the people that are there to narrow it down will sit there for days, like 8 hours at a time, just a couple days in a row, going through each submission, and everybody's kind of sitting there and giving opinions on people's work, and we usually try to narrow it down to around 100, and then Clint will go by himself and get it down to the 100, and then usually for the top winners, it's not like an official final, but we try to like sit there and go like, which ones do we think are going to get into the, we call it the top 20 or something. So every different person has their own opinion which one's the top 20, and then Clint kind of thinks about that, and then he goes with the actual final judges, which I think this time is like Sam and Nico. I forget who the last person is, but then they go through and decide the top 5 and the order and everything on stream. But it's a couple days of a process, and it takes a while. There's a lot of arguing of like somebody really likes a render, or Clint really likes a render, but then 4 other people are like, no, the one before it's way better, and a lot of discussion on why we think so, and it's a big process for sure with so many renders and so much talent kind of in the top 100.
Do you guys have any kind of like system behind it? Like, do you use like a grading system? Like when you watch through them, do you like maybe like put them on one layer of the editing track and like, okay, this is
That's
like
what it is.
top selection, this is like worst. That's what
So
you do?
we say move it up, or we say move it up 2 times, and he moves it up 1 or 2 tracks.
I see.
And every time we watch it through, we're watching the next track up. So if we watch everything through once and we think, okay, well, this one's definitely like really, really good, we'll say move it up 2, so that we won't see it the next time, but we're going to see the ones that we moved up once. And we watch all the ones we moved up once, and then we say, move it up again, and then we'll watch those, and we kind of just pyramid narrow it down, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can imagine that working pretty well. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's cool. With how many people like are there in those like decision streams usually?
Like 6 to 9, 6 to 10.
It's
A lot
that's
of a lot
a
of
lot of
people.
opinions.
Yeah.
You also, I think you also told me once that you help like technically set up the challenges sometimes, right?
Yeah, I think this time one of the admins visual took a lot of the lead on getting everything done for it. I usually help with uh, getting the Maya file set up, getting that all technically ready. We work together between all the DCCs to make sure all the starting files are the same.
Hmm.
Uh, then we kind of there's a lot of discussion before the files are made about how we're going to make them, what the scene's actually going to be. Lots of discussion on aspect ratios, which one feels best for the current animation that we have. There's a lot of discussion on what the animation is. How do you come up with a animation style and idea that's going to work for 6,000 people watching it directly in a row without it feeling terrible. Like you have to
Yeah.
go with, I think we've gotten the hang of it. This is going to be our ninth monthly challenge.
Hmm.
So we kind of know how to go about our ideas, and we all kind of have good ideas, but it takes probably a month or two for us to come up with what the idea is, and then we kind of discuss how we want the animations to work, or whatever the starting file is. And that's a lot of the difficult part, is how do we make a file that's going to be locked down enough where it's going to feel like a cohesive product, but it's not like too difficult of a scene that people who are too new to 3D are going to have a hard time creating a good product. So, uh, through the trials of the ones we've ran, we've figured out kind of how to create the starting file that will give the most people a good looking scene in the easiest way. Like, we're not sticking the character directly like 5 inches from the camera, where you're gonna have to do like poor detail on your guy. We stick him a little bit far away. We do the animation, it's not too crazy high impact, so that like everybody's animation rig breaks with their character. So we do it, a little bit more general. There's a lot of unseen thought processes behind how you create a month-long challenge for a couple thousand people.
Yeah. I think that's also why they work so well, especially with like the Clint challenges, because they feel more conceptual. Like they are not like too focused onto one specific
Mhm.
thing, but it's more like they focus on a concept, right? Like you okay do. I mean, like most of the time you have like a very specific animation or camera move or something,
Mhm.
but also that kind of like just like tells you a little bit of the concept, right? Like with the final boss fight, for example, right? With the camera like
Mhm.
orbiting around, it's still extremely open for anyone to like put their own ideas into it, since it feels more like
Yeah,
a general idea than a direct direction, I guess.
definitely locking things down more. I feel creates more creativity in people. When you give people too many options, you kind of go into like an artistic freeze, and you don't know what to make.
Hmm.
Where if you lock down something more, you can not worry about these aspects of it, and you can put all your focus into making it creative over here. And usually we get really, I mean, it is crazy that after almost 6,000 entries, you barely see the same idea more than
Hmm.
once, right? Like, obviously you're going to see a bunch of Star Wars, and you're going to see a bunch of like Lord of the Rings stuff, but
A few
generally,
Marios.
yeah, a few Mario's, a few Portals, right? Like you're gonna see people's interests kind of come out in their like an IP that they really like. But generally, like even within that, you'll see some stormtroopers, but they're all doing like crazily different things. Like everybody's idea is very vastly different. You would think after a few thousand with the same starting file that somebody's going to have like the exact same idea, and it's going to look very similar. It's crazy to see the creativity basically throughout all of them.
Yeah. I think you guys strike a good balance between
Hmm.
like locking in what people need to do and giving them enough freedom to express themselves.
Hmm.
You also said that tomorrow is gonna start a new one, right?
I believe it is tomorrow. Let me double check. Uh, but I think so.
Oh
That's
yeah.
when that's when we're sending it out. Let me see.
I think I think it could make sense for like since we here at the Calver School also do weekly challenges. I think it would make sense to just kind of like instead of doing our own challenge every week to like
Mhm.
join Clint's challenge for one of those weekly challenges. Just to
That
like
could be
kind of
cool.
like get everyone on that and like make sure that everyone submits to it, right? Because taking part in a bigger challenge, bigger community like that is really really cool. It's a
Hmm.
lot of fun.
It actually comes out exactly one day from right now. 23 hours, 58 minutes, and 50 seconds from right now.
Oh damn.
It was exactly one day.
Perfect time.
Yeah. So everybody join that. That's always fun. There's a enormous amount of prizes that will get announced tomorrow, and I think this one's gonna be super, super, super fun.
Nice. Yeah, very excited to join on that one.
Yeah.
All right. We are getting pretty close to finishing up our interview. I wanted there's a still like if anybody has questions, type them in. Right, we're still available for a bit. But there is a kind of like an interactive experiment that I like to do with my guests every time at the end of the interview, and I think it could be especially interesting with you since you are probably the first guest who's more technical, right? Like a technical
Hmm.
artist. So it would be interesting to see how you experience this experiment differently. Have you watched any of the other interviews at the end with the
I
interactive
think
thought experiment?
I think I may have seen one, but I don't know exactly.
Okay. So basically, I'm going to ask you to imagine things, right? So I want to like kind of test your visual imagination,
Okay.
and then we're just gonna do kind of like an interactive exploration of that, right? I'll ask you to imagine something, you describe to me exactly what you see, what happens in your mind, and yeah, then we just like kind of like go from there, and I try to like figure out where your strengths and weaknesses and where your imagination is unique in comparison to others, maybe.
Hmm.
Yeah, you're done for that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Nice, awesome. Okay. So let's start with that by just like you can try to relax a little bit, try to like don't think of you being in an interview anymore. That's no need to think of answers or just like try to have an empty mind as much as you can. And then you can go ahead and start closing your eyes so it's easier to visualize things in your mind. And I just want you to imagine an apple and tell me everything you see, what's happening.
Uh, is it just an apple, or is it like a, a room or a table?
There's no
What are we?
limitations just yet. Like I just want you to imagine an apple and tell me what happens.
Usually, when I'm thinking of like just one thing, I see it in like a softbox environment, if that makes
Uh-huh.
sense. Like it has a specific softbox lighting on it with like one of those like infinity backgrounds, so you can't
Mm.
see anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on like a little pedestal. If I'm thinking of just like one object, that's kind of how I would see it. So you see it in uh like like a square shot of an apple on a pedestal, and that's it.
Oh, so you kind of like see it already framed as a one by one square render?
Yeah.
Interesting. Um, the pedestal is also interesting. Like, what is that made of, or like, how does it look like?
It just kind of like a matte 50% gray. It looks like a 3D program.
Uh-huh.
Like a 50% gray pedestal, perfect. No bevels on the edges, square. Just for something to be sitting on to kind of give it a grounding instead of it being like in a void.
Okay,
Uh,
so if you look at that apple more closely, can you tell me the details that you see on that apple?
um, I can see like the little speckles and the stripes that go on the side of the apple. I can kind of see the inconsistencies in like the waxiness of the specular highlight on the top of it. Um, you can kind of see just a little raisoning, if that makes sense, like the wobbliness of the
Mhm.
surface.
Yes, yes. If you look at
Uh,
this apple by itself, like does it still feel like you're in a 3D environment, or is it like it feels like you just look at a real apple?
I think it looks like a real apple, but the way I've visualized things for so long have been 3D. Like I used to dream where I would see like wireframes, and so so like everything feels like I'm seeing it like through a viewport, if that
Mm,
makes sense. Like, uh,
interesting.
but it looks like a real apple. You know, it very well textured, very well. The
Convincingly
shade,
realistic.
the shader's great. The shader's great. Like, if I wanted to, I could think about it and like see the wireframe, um, and
Mhm.
then from there I would kind of like think about what the UVs might look like of it and how I would lay those out. And that's kind of where my brain goes.
So you can basically imagine like the whole 3D workflow that you would do to create that apple right now.
Yeah, yeah. That's not that's like everything. I'll walk around and I'll like see a car and then I'll think about like the shader and then I'll think about like, oh, those flakes are cool. How would I do the flakes in it? And it's just immediate like tangent
Interesting, interesting. Yeah,
throughout
very
the day.
focused on that. Yeah. I would like to kind of like see how far we can abstract that from your, I guess, like
Mhm.
3D focused imagination. Like, can you first of all, let's try that you imagine reaching out with your hand to that apple and just pick it up and hold it in your hand.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay. Do you feel the weight? Like, can you kind of like, do you have that sense of weight in your hand? Can you imagine that?
No, can't.
Okay. Okay. All right, so I want to try to like have you imagine an environment that you take this apple to. Maybe, okay, I'm not going to give any suggestions, but like, where would you take this apple in the real world and try to imagine that?
Well, it's already in a photo studio, so I'd say I would be in a photo studio.
Hmm. What is in that photo studio? Like, if you went
Uh,
around and explored that studio?
you got a camera on a tripod. You got a craft service table in the back. You got a few people hanging out on you know some chairs in the background. You have a few like trellised lights, a few like C clamp lights. You got a few you know sandbags on the floor holding those down. You have uh, it's a dark room, obviously with kind of you know the lighting set up in the end. Um, some doors around to leave the room. That's about
Are,
it. Pretty
are,
empty. Looks like a warehouse kind of thing.
I see. There are other people you said, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you like hear them talking? Can you approach them and tell them something?
Uh, I would say that's pretty weak. Uh, I would like kind of yes, but I don't think I could have a conversation
So
about while we're talking. I would say
I see, I see. But you can imagine the sounds, like you can imagine them saying things. You hear those things.
weakly. Yeah,
Hmm. I see, more like a mumbling maybe.
yeah, yeah. Like a crowd kind of mumbling.
I see, I see. Okay, okay. All right, I want to try to abstract a little bit with you now. So if you still have that apple in your hand, um, can you try turning that apple into a different object, like a game controller?
Okay, yeah.
How did that happen? Like you already did that?
It morphed.
It's kind of like
So kind of
fluid.
like a blend shape.
Ah, okay, okay. With the texture kind of like fading from one thing to the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see. Just straight up morph. I see. Okay. Um, can you imagine that controller now turning into liquid and floating in zero gravity?
Okay. And zero gravity. Okay. Yeah.
How does that look like? What happens?
Uh, it spherizes, becomes like a water sphere. Because if it was floating, I imagined it maybe didn't have any gravity, and without gravity, it becomes a sphere through its own like surface tension.
Very cool, very cool. Does it still have the kind of like the color and the shader of the controller?
Oh no, it became water.
Just straight up water.
Yeah.
All right. Can you try for me to give this water blob the appearance of the controller? Like just imagine the controller
the sh-
turning
the
into
shape
liquid.
again, or
No, more like the controller just becoming a liquid form of itself, right? Like almost like melting.
oh, like the plastic is melting or something,
Yes,
or
yes, yes.
yeah. I can do that.
All right. If you can you reach out and touch it and tell me if you feel anything cold or hot? Like what does it feel like?
I don't feel anything cold or hot. No like resistance. It's just kind of hand going through it at a constant speed.
Mm-hmm. Cool, cool. Okay, something I want to try to like have you imagine something that people usually like to do in their dreams, which is to fly, right?
Hmm.
Just like kind of like fly somewhere on the world or into space. How does that work for you?
Uh, just start floating. I think that I can faintly kind of imagine the like sinking feeling you would have in your stomach.
Ah, okay.
That's about it. It just feels, you're floating. I don't know where uh the floating would start. Maybe in your hands or something. But yeah,
So let's take off somewhere. Where would you fly to?
uh, space. That sounds cool.
All right. Take me through it. Take off into space and tell me what you're seeing, what's happening.
Uh, I go into space. I was just gonna go to the moon. Shot pretty small, didn't I? Fuck.
The closest space object possible.
Yeah, yeah. I go to Starlink. No, no. Yeah, just it was pretty quick, maybe like a second or two, and then at the moon, I don't know if it kind of like cut to the moon, or if it was just that fast.
Oh, so it felt like you like it almost was just like a straight teleport to the moon.
Yeah, like you start flying, and then it just kind of on the moon like appeared. I feel like that's pretty dreamlike. Like you think you're going
Mm.
to do something, and then you're there.
Yeah, and then you try to like remember what happened, but and then you realize there was nothing in between. It was just like one thing after the other.
Yeah, yeah.
I see. I see. All right. All right. Yeah, cool. I think that's as far as I want to take it right now. You can open up your eyes again if you like.
Cool.
And yeah, something that's also interesting to me is like how clear was that visual image in front of you, like when you compare it to your real vision, like between 0 and 100%.
I'd say it's similar. It's just a lot easier to be blurry and more kind of general. But then when you focus on something, it kind of like rasterizes the information that you're thinking about. If that like renders it out almost. Yeah.
Ah, okay. So you would say like 100%, it just feels more dreamlike?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ah, okay, okay.
I would
Interesting.
give it like 90, 95. Like it doesn't feel like it's in front of you, but I can imagine I can like think about all the detail and yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, because usually when people kind of like imagine things, it's it's not as clear as the real eyesight, right? Like it's around like they mostly they describe as if it was like half transparent, like black, just like put on top, right? So it's much darker than your usual eyesight. So that's definitely then unique to you, I think, that you have like this pretty bright,
Well,
clear image.
I think I mean that it's definitely you don't. I'm not physically seeing anything, right? I'm just
Yeah,
imagining
yeah,
what it would look like, but um, it's yeah, it's definitely more general. But the more you think about something, it kind of spirals and creates the detail about what I'm thinking about. So it
hmm
makes the image more clear. Maybe not at one time. Like if I'm looking, if you're thinking about something like the apple skin, right? It would kind of like it kind of like does these pop outs on the side, you know, when somebody's like doing like pointing at detail and stuff and it has a little like pop out of like a
Oh,
zoomed in
the
image.
picture in picture, yeah.
That's what I see. Like I see like a thing of an apple, but that does like a pop out and has like here's like here's like the little stripe, and then it has like another one on the side. It's like
Check this
here's like
out.
the dots. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's also it's also pretty unique to you. Like that no one has told me that they see things that way in the imagination, but it seems that it comes from your just like constant training in that area, right? Like that you're so focused on creating detail in 3D software and on a computer environment that you
yeah.
also imagine things that way. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Also, that you kind of like throughout the whole thing, like you told me at the beginning, you had this kind of like one by one, almost like letterbox view of the apple, right?
Yeah.
Did Was that something that was persistent? Like, did you always have some kind of like
A
vision
frame.
block
Yeah,
framing? Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of like a focused on like a frame, and then it puts the image in there. And it's never really just like full vision, like
Mm,
how you would see through your eyes. It's always like some sort of frame. Uh, yeah,
I see. Wow. Yeah, yeah. That really seems like your mind is just like so trained on imagining things this way because you use it so much, right?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, back when I started 3D, I was doing it so much that uh, I would have a dream about like a project I was working on, and I would think about how the topology would work, and then I'd wake up and go fix my topology on my model.
I dreamed how to fix it. Now I can do it in real life too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's how that's like I've heard stories of like inventors like Tesla, I think it was, or Edison. No, it was Edison.
Mhm.
Edison like used to have like a notebook next to his bed, and like he dreamt of inventions and of solutions, and then like yeah, he woke up and wrote them down, and then they ended up being real inventions. So yeah, it's a
Yeah,
pretty real effect that people can use their dreams and imagination to solve real world things.
I agree.
Yeah, 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 very interesting. This just like in general, like the way people use their imagination is very different, right? Like I don't know if you knew this, but like there are people who don't have any kind of visual imagination. They only, when you ask them to imagine something, they can maybe imagine the feeling or the concept of something, but they don't
Yeah.
have a visual imagination, right?
I've heard that, and I've always thought that I think people are misinterpreting how people are explaining what they're seeing. Maybe I'm wrong. When people say like, "Oh, I don't see an apple," right? I just see like an outline, and then somebody else says, "No, I see an apple." I think it's just I feel like people are seeing the same thing, but they're describing the experience differently.
Hmm.
Like, because you're not physically seeing it, right? In your mind, you're kind of thinking of it, and one person's saying, "Oh, I'm seeing it," and then this person's saying, "Well, I don't see anything." It's just right. I think people are seeing very similar things. They're just describing it differently with how they perceive the experience.
Maybe that's part of it, but I think that the way people's imagination works in all kinds of senses, right? Like sight or smell or touch, like
Hmm.
all the senses. I think those things are very different strength-wise in your mind, right? Like how you could imagine them. So I think there's still a real point of that that's not just explanatory, or like not being able to tell people how you experience these things, because mm, yeah, because sometimes I did this experiment a bunch with friends and colleagues, and it's always like sometimes it's like vastly different on what they can tell me what they do, and people
Yeah.
who uh, tell me that they can't visually imagine stuff, when I ask them to, yeah, to like change things, or like I don't know, like look at the apple on the other side or something, like they
Hmm.
can tell me that they describe an apple to me, they just don't see it, right? Which could be what you're saying, right? They just
Yeah.
don't understand that what they are seeing in their mind, or that it's that they don't really accept it as a visual sense.
Yeah.
But when I ask these people to like explain to me the other side, or like a different aspect of that thing I want them to imagine, then they have a really, really hard time to do that. So I think there are like real different ways people have access to these senses in their
That's interesting.
imagination.
Yeah, I've always thought like if you weren't able to visualize something, if I showed you an apple, right, and you're not able to visualize it at all, it's going to look like a completely new thing to you. You've never seen it before. It's wild. I think the way that you're able to recognize things is by knowing what they look like, right? And if you know what they look like, that means you're able to imagine what they look like. So if somebody is able to remember a person by their face, they're able to visualize what that person kind of looks like in their head. If they're able to recognize objects, they're kind of visualizing what that object looks like in their head. It might be different levels of like how real it looks, right? But if I show you a red apple and then I show you a green apple, you'd be like, "Whoa, that's a crazy object I've never seen in my life."
What is that? What are
What is
those?
that? You're like, is that an apple? I forgot what that looks like. I feel like the way that you, I that's why I think it's a way it's a differentiation of how they're describing the experience, because I can't imagine there's a way to remember something uh, without knowing what it looks like. Like, how are you able to remember what something looks like and recognize an object without knowing what it looks like?
Yeah, but I think that's yeah, it's an interesting discussion, because I think that people don't necessarily have like their recognition patterns connected to the visual, like to the visual
Hmm.
senses. I mean, of course, that's the input that you get, right? But I think there's also the people that don't react by recognizing something visually, but like listening to their emotional reaction, right? Like if they
Mm.
see something and it makes them react, feel a certain way, then they know, okay, this is an apple, because I feel maybe like the taste of it, right? Like I mm, yeah, I think like your brain can like cross reference different senses, and
Mm.
I think different senses are way more combined and interconnected than they are. Like
Yeah,
they are probably not so separate, right? Like sight doesn't always just have to connect with other visual things. Like sight can
yeah.
also connect directly into sound, right? Like if you see something, it could also create a sound in your head automatically.
Would it be weird if somebody said like, "Hey, this is my favorite food, but I can't remember what it tastes like."
Mm.
Right? I mean, like you kind of you have a catalog of your experience, and you recollect them with that sense to say whether it's a positive experience or a negative experience, or whatever it is, right? Like I like this food because I remember what it tastes like, or I like this piece of this movie because I remember things about it that I enjoyed, right? You're kind of, and if you say like, oh, I have this favorite scene from a movie, you're kind of imagining a little bit about that scene, even if it's not like the full 24 FPS HDR movie. You're kind of remembering snippets of it and little images or details about it. So I don't know.
Mm.
That's why I think you're people are just having
But
having a differentiation about how they describe things.
maybe, but like like you saying like remembering a taste or like imagine how something like my favorite food tastes. I have to
Hmm.
say I can't imagine taste right now. Can you imagine how something tastes?
Yeah, like if I asked you like lemonade, right? Like I can imagine what lemonade tastes like. Like I can kind of feel the sourness of it. You can feel the sweetness of it a little bit. You feel the earthiness of the lemon a little bit. But
That's
it's not you're
interesting
not
because
you're not
I
physically tasting it, right? But
yeah, nothing is physical, but like yeah, I mean, kind of like the brain probably like fires similar neurons to like that real experience to like make it
yeah,
in a way like it feels like you're tasting it.
yeah. And
But
lemonade's an
yeah,
easy one because that's pretty shocking, I guess, when you try it for the first time. It's
yeah,
very lots of flavor, lots of flavor.
but that's interesting. I never tried to imagine a taste, and now that you say that, I can't like I can tell you the kind of like the sensation lemon has from like remembering it, right? Like I know it's sour,
Hmm.
but I can't imagine the feeling. I can just kind of like tell you from the database of kind of like words that describe it, right?
Mm.
From the
But
experience back then.
when you taste it, you're not going to be like, "What is this?" It's You're gonna be like, "Oh, it's lemonade,"
Yeah, man, how do you figure this out? Like
which
maybe
means
it's
which somewhere in you there's a catalog of what it does taste like for you to recognize that's what it does taste like.
yeah, definitely. But it's hard for me to
Kind of pull
yeah
that out.
imagine.
Maybe that's something you could kind of like work on with brain experience and stuff, trying to remember what things taste like. Or it's might be the same thing about visualizing, is people aren't really flexing that muscle, so they haven't
Mm,
trained it. Uh,
yeah, probably.
so it becomes
I'm, try-
weaker.
I'm trying to like figure out a way to like test that right now. Like maybe when tastes, like when people can imagine tastes pretty well, maybe they are able to imagine how mixing two different tastes would taste like, right? Because for me right now, if I think of putting a lemonade or like mixing a lemonade with Coca-Cola,
Hmm.
I I don't know what that would taste like. Can you
I can too.
imagine
Sorry,
that?
I just yeah, my mouth just.
To me,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
like that kind of imagination, I guess, is just much harder for me than for you. Then it seems, yeah.
I do a lot of cooking. Like cooking is the I wanted to be a cook originally. I wanted to be a chef.
Ah,
But then I learned that it was only negatives for being a professional chef. It was you don't get to eat the food you make. You don't make that much money. Even Michelin star chefs in New York are making like 85,000 US or 90,000 US, and that's like
huh.
the top
The top.
of people who cook,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
it's a good life, but definitely not rich.
Yeah, they don't make much money. You don't get to eat the food you make, and you work nights, weekends, and holidays. It's like
Hmm.
all three terrible things. So that's when I found CG, and I kind of moved more towards that. But you know, I cook for myself all the time, and I think that may be uh, part of why that muscle for me is more vibrant, because I'm
Hmm.
constantly thinking about like, oh, like I could use this ingredient with that one, and kind of mix them together, and you know, this is what it would taste like. Let me try it, and uh,
Yeah, yeah.
that could be
Maybe
possible.
it's maybe. I mean, it definitely is something that you can train. Yeah, I believe that for sure. Maybe it's just like maybe in general, like just imagine being able to imagine your senses is just in the real world, in the awake world, right? Just like putting extra attention towards those things and building a in a database, right? So you just have more
Yeah,
reference when you imagine things, and then it feels also more real.
yeah. I mean, describing things isn't a I think describing the way things taste is very difficult, because the we don't I don't know if it's the words for describing things are difficult for the way things taste. You can kind of dance around what they
Mm.
taste like, but you never get like the full uh, picture by describing them to me.
Yeah, that's true. It's hard to put
So
into words
yeah,
how things taste. Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
imagine what things taste like, but if you ask me to describe them, I'm like, oh,
Very difficult task.
lemony, it tastes lemony.
There must be, I mean, there must be like some kind of literature art form that's focused on verbalizing taste, right?
There definitely is, but different languages have better descripting words
Hmm.
for different things, and the language that you learn kind of dictates how you're able to remember things as well. Like
Yeah.
if a language has much greater verbiage for nuances in a specific subject, you're going to be able to catalog those nuances much more descriptively than a language with much less nuance in the way it describes. I think there's like a study on color, right, and how people remember color. The color blue wasn't definitively like written down for a very long time,
Mm.
so people weren't really able to distinguish between like reds and purples and blues. They would just be like, "Oh, that's red," right? Or like, "Oh, that's a deep wine color," is what they used to
Mm.
describe like the ocean as, right?
Interesting.
But we would describe it very much as blue. And then there's another country where they have like 75 different words for like a very small section of green shades, and they would show it to English speakers, and they're like, it's like green, or it's yellow green, right? But
Mm.
this country was able to describe like each swatch as a different color.
Mm. And they could pinpoint it really well, the people who grew up with that, right?
Yeah, so the language that you learn also kind of determines how well you're able to describe certain aspects, depending on what areas your language has decided to create nuances and kind of categorize those.
Yeah, I've heard an interesting thing. I don't fully remember the facts or like what country it was, but I've heard that maybe it was Denmark. Like because Danish. Okay, like I'm just telling the story how I remember it. It's not completely true, probably, but it's something in that direction, right? Like Danish is such a difficult language that the kids who grew up there, they learn to speak much later, like maybe 1 or 2 years later
Hmm.
they can actually speak compared to other European languages or yeah, to their like neighbors. So they have a lower IQ when growing up than yeah, compared to people learning growing up with other languages, because they are much quicker in being able to
They don't have the words to describe their experiences, so they're not able to categorize and grow and kind of build, a knowledge mountain for
yeah,
themselves. They're kind of stuck trying to build the base for a longer amount of time. So that
exactly.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting how impactful language is into culture and intelligence and stuff.
Yeah.
All right, man. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy now with our interview. We went also 30 minutes above. We're in for like
Woo.
1.5 hours now. Yeah, I want to thank you very much for coming onto the interview. Yeah, do you want to say anything as like your last words?
Don't forget to check out the Crit with Clint monthly challenge in 23 hours and 30 minutes. That's
Hell
it.
yeah. Hell yeah. All right. We're going to all check it out. We're all going to participate just because you told us so. We're going to put it in the chat. Concezio told us to
Cool.
join.
Nice.
But okay. Yeah, then I'll say goodbye, Concezio. Thank you very much. You're also on the Discord server a lot. So yeah, if anybody like, I mean, we will stumble across you again on there, which is really
Yeah.
nice. Thank you for participating. So yeah,
No
have a,
worries.
have a good night, man.
See you.
Bye bye. All right, guys. So I'm gonna close the stream in a moment, and then we're gonna have the Create Together stream again, where we will finish up the Batman skating shot for the weekly challenge. Yeah, so I'll close the stream down, and I'll see you guys again in around 10 minutes. All right.